on behalf of the International Writing Program and the Iowa City Public Library, I'd like to welcome you to the series of fall residency panels, which take place most Fridays during the most early part of the fall semester here at the Public Library at noon. We're very happy to be back again and seeing old friends. A special thanks to International Programs, which has sponsored the pizzas for many years and has renewed its sponsorship. So let them be in your hearts. Today's panel, it's wonderful to see everybody come out for it. It's a great place to start the conversations for the fall, and it's called Writing the Not Self. For those of you who have been seeing our little village insert around town, there's a list of all the panels you can read there, as well as coverage of our weekly events, bios of the writers, and you can also get all that information on Facebook. The prompt that we gave the writers for this week had to do with the responsibility and empathy of writing the other, the limitations potentially on writing about the other, and how that affects how that might affect different kinds of writers in different kinds of situations. I'm going to introduce all the writers. They're going to make short presentations, and then we're going to open it up to questions. And I encourage you to participate in that part of the event. We'll be going in order as they're seated from your left to your right. And so we'll begin with Gina Cole, who is the author of Black Ice Matter, which won the Best First Book of Fiction at the 2017 Ockham New Zealand Book Awards. And she was also the winner of the 2014 Auckland Pride Festival's Creating Writing Competition for the poem Airport Obad. Cole's work has been widely anthologized, and she was the keynote speaker at the 2017 Auckland Writers Festival and the same but different LGBTQIA Writing Festival. She is a barrister specializing in family law, and she is participating courtesy of Creative New Zealand. Kateryna Babkina from the Ukraine has been called the voice of her generation by critics in response to her writing, which grapples with issues of life in post-Soviet Ukraine. She published her first book at 17. Since then, she has authored 3 story collections, 4 volumes of poetry, and 2 novels with translations into 12 languages. Her work, Sonia, was shortlisted for the 2013 BBC Book of the Year. 3 of her screenplays have been made into films, including the works we would transliterate as Evil and a second work called The Yellow Box. Her children's book, transliterated as Cappy and the Whale, was a great commercial success and raised funds for pediatric cancer. She participates courtesy of the Paul and Pauline Engel Fund. To her left is Chandramohan Sathyanathan from India, who works to actively incorporate different media in his writing, including performance and mixed genre poetry, exploring various areas of discrimination in his country. He's the author of the poetry collection Warscape Verses and Letters to Namdeo Dasal, which was shortlisted for the Srinivas Rayapol Poetry Prize and the Harish Govind Memorial Prize. Sathyanathan coordinates English language poetry readings in Kerala, as well as a subaltern cultural collective. In 2016, he was listed as the Dalit Achiever of the Year, and he is participating courtesy of the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs at the State Department. Finally, but not least, on the far side is Eman Alyousuf from the United Arab Emirates, a chemical engineer and a writer. She is the author of 3 short story anthologies and 3 novels, among them Haris al-Shams, which transliterates as The Sun's Guardian, which won the 2016 Emirates Novel Award. Her feminist short film, Gaffa, which was screened at the 2017 Dubai International Film Festival, received criticism for addressing controversial topics, and I'll interject that it will be screened on September 9th in the Adler Journalism Building, and that's E105, I believe. And so you can come and assess whether or not the criticism was merited. A columnist and editor at Al Roya newspaper, she has published a collection of interviews with female Emirati writers and promotes literary culture at home and abroad. She has stated that her role as a writer is to provoke readers to ask questions, which is what we hope happens here today. She also participates courtesy of the U.S. State Department. I'm going to hand it off to Gina to get us going, and I hope the other writers will then also read their works, and then we'll come back for questions. Thank you.
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Aha, hawe pi, yakwe, kia ora, aloha, talofa lava, whakalofa lahi atu, malo lelei, bulavanaka. Hello, good day. You are a rainbow. Have life, love, life. I recognize the Iowa Nation as the indigenous people of this land that we stand on today, and I greet you in their language. I also greet you in some of the many indigenous languages of the Pacific Ocean, from the Marshallese people of the Marshall Islands, Māori of Aotearoa, of Hawaii, Samoa, Niue, Tonga, and Fiji. What is the not self? How can I think of this not self when I search for my self every single day? In my writing, I swim in a constantly shifting pool of identity, navigating many currents in order to write myself into existence. I am a second-generation immigrant, a New Zealander, a Kiwi. I am a citizen of Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, New Zealand. My heritage is Fijian and Scottish Welsh. I am manuhiri, a visitor welcomed by Māori, tangata whenua, the people of the land, the indigenous people of Aotearoa. I am a Fijian lesbian woman who writes. I am an indigenous woman, part of the Pacifica diaspora in Aotearoa. I am other. As an indigenous woman, my proposition today is that I live in a post-apocalyptic dystopia. Colonization is the apocalypse for me, for my ancestors, for all indigenous peoples. Of course, we are not one homogenous group. We do not have one essential experience, but we have all suffered atrocities otherwise related as adventure stories by Europeans. We were searched out, killed, hunted, infected with diseased blankets and diseases we had never seen before, poisoned by alcohol laced with strychnine, our lands stolen, our religions outlawed, our languages prohibited, our children taken from us, our skins flayed, our heads shrunk and put on display, our populations decimated, reduced by 95%, our very right to exist denied by law, by a stroke of the legislative pen. Smooth the pillow of a dying race was official policy. Breeding out of our racial characteristics was encouraged, even by rape. We are still believed to be savages, animals, cannibals, inferior, promiscuous, of no consequence. This thinking continues to be reflected today in the negative statistics for our housing, our education, our employment, our disproportionate incarceration in the prison industrial complex, our early mortality, our targeting by the authorities. This thinking allows our islands to continue to be bombed for the good of mankind, for testing nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles blasting our reefs apart over and over and over again, while we face the devastating effects of climate change. This thinking allows the building of pipelines and marinas and roads over our sacred sites. I thank my ancestors for their strength, their will to survive and thrive and resist. My ancestors are with me today. Their power lives on in me. Outwardly, you may never know that. I have assimilated to your ways in order to survive, and this is an ongoing violence visited upon myself. I have learned to be a chameleon, switching between codes. I know your laws. I fight in your wars. I speak your language. I write your language. I write myself in your language. I write you in your language. I thrive and survive in a hostile environment, looking over my shoulder, questioning and looking for myself. I live a version of my not self every day. I struggle to be my authentic self minute by minute. You may not notice myself while you are living yourself every single day. I am here with you, and I am still learning your language and my language and the languages of other Indigenous peoples. We have our own enlightenment, our own traditions, our own wisdoms, our own stories, our own songs, our own languages, our own futures and pasts and now. Is this too on the nose for you? Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you see the cost? Do you want forgiveness? Do you harbor guilt? Oh, you want to write myself? Fair enough. You are a writer, a storyteller. You have imagination. We both use the tools of writing, of language, of words. Words like power, differential, alienation, truth, authenticity, compassion, partnership, equality, fairness, and kindness. But remember our shared history. I challenge you to use these tools wisely, with respect and understanding, with an eye for your blind spots. Try to remember my humanity, because I try to see your humanity every single day. We are both human. I am you. Thank you.
Hi, pleasure to be here. I'm Kateryna Babkina. I really hope there's going to be some pizza left when we are done. So, speaking about writing the not self, I'm going to also read you my first paper I have ever written in English. So please try to be gentle and understanding. If I were you, my grandfather used to say, I would not be in your place now. This admonishment referred mostly to the situations when something was lost or broken or done wrong, and someone, more specifically me, was about to be punished. But generally, my grandfather's statement describes pretty well the situation when someone is trying to be in the place of someone else. This approach is not even about being judgmental or blaming or depreciating, which is obviously not acceptable. It is just about trying to solve something from the position of somebody else. Somehow, when we put ourselves in the place of somebody else, we immediately decide that this other person has done something wrong that actually led to the situation we can consider as a problem. And this kind of presumption of guilt makes us think how we would act if we were in the place of the other, so that would not end up in the same problematic place. Michel Foucault said our knowing of other is rather the creation and maintenance of imaginary representations. However, the real, living, flesh and blood other, a person or group of people with their lives, ideas, pains or challenges, might feel kind of depreciated by the fact that someone is trying to simulate their lives, trying to turn them into some imaginary substance. Those claims of knowing the other when in fact we are only imagining them can be really harmful. And after considering this, if you ask me, can the writer speak on behalf of not self, I would rather say no. However, there is some super sin about being the writer, some particular superpower that every good fiction writer has for sure. Its unique capacity of being someone else. This super skill of transforming into the not-self follows the footstep of Flaubert becoming Madame Bovary and admitting this clearly and aloud. Therefore, writers are the only providers of the possibility to have an emotional experience inside the lives of the other without having that actual life and without being demanded to deliver any solutions. Writing of this kind can illuminate a specific time and place, situations or personality, challenge or disaster, and thus grow empathy, desire to know, understand, appreciate, love, share, or help. And even the scenes, peoples, and worlds which do not literally exist, this way can be experienced as real, and so known, understood, appreciated, loved, shared, and even helped. I've myself taken the challenge of being a not-self with every book I write. The last time I took this challenge, as I worked on the children's books about a boy with a blood cancer. It took me more than a year of research and witnessing and sharing a lot with kids, parents, doctors, and volunteers. And to be brief, what I've taken from all those people who I spent that year with was the ability to talk about cancer and death with no pathos and tragedy. The games that bedridden kids invent for themselves, or the plans they build for every new day or every new part of the day, the bargain they have with doctors and mothers to have some forbidden fun, whether that fun is a walk outside or unsized piece of chocolate, the way they accept death, pain, suffering of their parents, the way they emotionally survive despite the limitation of food and activities, turned out to be way more informative than all of the statistic that kills you with their bleakness or tear-jerking descriptions. So at the end, the story I wrote was not a tragedy, simply precise and, I hope, empathic. Everything that writer creates after honest investigation and research and achieving true empathy and deep understanding and articulating questions without trying to give any answers, up to me is a real thing, because in the process of delivering such writing, selves and not selves disappear and only human values and good stories remain. If I were my grandfather, I would probably never make the statement he did to me, but the truth is my grandfather has passed away so long ago that even the wrinkled, pale face of my best friend of childhood has become transparent and almost faded entirely from my memory. I do not really remember any of his statement. Still, when writing, I dare to be him. And so, through me, he tells the joke I've started the whole thing with and many other jokes. And whenever he is now, I'm more than sure he doesn't mind.
Thank you, Iowa. Thank you, each one of you. Not writing the self. Why is it important to discuss the not self at this juncture? Because in an increasingly multicultural world, every writer has many components in him or herself. This multifaceted self is even more pronounced when a writer's literary output is inextricably intertwined with activism in more than one socio-political cultural movement. For example, the most readily comes to my mind is that of a black feminist in the United States. This question warrants much more scrutiny in the times when lack of solidarity between various movements may have contributed to dramatic upsurge of right-wing political sentiments worldwide. The inability to understand the soul of the other, can result in appalling consequences. A rap music, which is widely praised as being an expression of resistance by Afro-Americans, is often loaded with misogyny and homophobia. These loaded words can blunt the progressive impact that rap and other radical art forms can embody. The impact on a writer when he engages with the other is that he learns a new language, a language sensitive to the taste buds of the other. Learning this language helps prevent a process of dehumanization, and the writer might learn to evolve himself or herself into a writer of more inclusive language. Most activists or writers I know of strive to construct a language which has breathing space for all. The all, quote unquote all, is an attempt at universal inclusion, especially inclusion of the margins. What, if any, is a writer's responsibility towards representing the other accurately? I would imagine that the writer, any writer, should first listen to the tonality of writers from the other with patience and evolve one's own perspective as a response to it, being careful never to deprive them of their agency. The common errors are that many writers indulge in a form of quote-unquote epistemic violence, a term coined by Gayatri Spivak for the infliction of harm to others via the discourse, or they eroticize the soul of the other, or they perpetuate a victim narrative. What effort in understanding, empathy, research may be needed? Are there comparable challenges for one writing from a marginalized position? One challenge is that we marginalized writers are often reduced to a status of mere spokespeople for the community. Another challenge could be that we are often forced to be politically correct from a dominant position articulated from within our community. The second challenge is that we are often forced to be politically correct from a dominant position articulated within our community. Another challenge could be the process of naming oneself that may provoke how we are related to the other, resulting in a radical reconstruction of the self and the other. After the rise of identity politics, the right to speak for the other is often highly censored. Those with privilege have a responsibility to express their views such that the dominant trends from the marginalized groups cannot be contradicted. Being a Dalit writer in English, I have often observed that the portrayal of Dalit lives by non-Dalits leave a lot to be desired. Most non-Dalit writers do not capture the spirit of our struggle. The spirit of our struggle is to strive for an alternative sense of aesthetics. This applies to the scrutiny of Dalit writing in translation. For example, there is an interview of Devanur Mahadeva, who was IWP in 1989, an Indian author whose opinions were mediated by another, in which he struggles to explain his stand in English. The whole process of translation should be dealt with prudent care, since it's a form of engagement with the other. In my writing, I've sought to engage with the other by reaching out to issues that plague Muslims worldwide and in my part of the world. India is caste-ridden. People assume that I am Hindu and that I'm vegetarian. And by making this assumption, they're trying to determine if I'm a Brahmin or a variant of a Brahminical caste. When people assume that I'm Hindu or Brahmin, they're systematically othering out the Muslim and anyone who does not have a mainstream cultural identity. Many Brahminical nationalists often use riots against Muslims as a fear tactic to temporarily unify non-Muslims across caste. Thus, Dalit writers who believe in Ambedkar's vision of annihilating caste can fine-tune, that's a typo in the text, can fine-tune their own subversiveness by engaging with Islamophobia. I would like to end by sharing excerpts from a poem I wrote to engage with the other, the part of a series of poems that attempt to look at beards and burkinis through an objective lens. So I'll read few parts from the poem. So this poem is a model after Wallace Stevens' poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. So the poem goes like this. So I hope most of you know what burkini is. Like burkini is a garment like Muslim women use when they're on the beaches. And French government happened to ban it. So it had become a very contentious issue. So my poem goes like this. 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Burkini, after Wallace Stevens. So here's an epigram. So the quote is this. I created the burkini to give women freedom, not to take it away. Ahida Saniti. I created the burkini to give women freedom, not to take it away. Ahida Saniti. Section 1. Burkini is a language terrifying those ignorant of its text. Cops patrol her tan lines like dams patrol rivers flowing above danger marks. Bruises sustained from frisking metamorphose into festering wounds. Gangrene could gnaw at your surname. Do you remember the first corpse the sea sucked off a turbulent beach? The sea spat it out after 3 days of frisking. During this conversation, some territory has been ceded across the tan lines of your body. History will catch up with you through your rear view mirror, even if you're full throttle in your pursuit of happiness. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Eman Alyousuf from Dubai, United Arab Emirates. I'll be sharing a really personal story with you for the first time in my life. Writing the Not Self, Stories That Live Within. In 1979, my 14-year-old mother left home in Baghdad, Iraq. She left her dolls, childhood pictures, clothes, school friends, neighbors, certificates, and the short jasmine tree she loved so much in the backyard garden with a swing her dad made. She never returned. To my mom, home became just a word. My mother still remembers the night her family escaped Iraq. In the borders between Iraq and Jordan, they told the soldiers that they were going to a cousin's wedding in Amman, and that they will be back by next morning. Their faces had to lie too. They had to look happy, believing their fake relatives lie, pretending that tomorrow morning isn't more than 30 years ahead. Darkness and fear are all she can recall. For her, the morning they all waited for never came. She experienced loss of home, security, and identity very early and had to live with it for the rest of her life. Watching her little brother wet his pants in the car that night, watching her father have to lie, and her mother shivering helplessly, she lost the innocence of the child and teenager she was. Lost trust in the world, something in our family's image cracked forever. My grandparents, aunts, and uncles became refugees, citizens of the world ever since. 34 years later, I wrote my first novel, The Window That Saw, which was inspired by my mom's story. My novel discusses the meanings of citizenship, homeland, identity, and ideology through the perspective of a woman named Zainab and 3 generations of her descendants. Originally from Turkey, Zainab abandons her disabled husband and escapes to Iraq in the 1940s. In the wake of her escape, her grandchildren experienced the 8-year Iran-Iraq war. Her great-grandchildren suffered the invasion of Kuwait in 1990, and finally, her great-great-grandchildren escaped to Canada as refugees. When writing, there are no others. None of the characters you bring to life, nor the incidents you create, are far from your innermost soul. One can't simply write outside of one's inner self. It's a writer's pain, suffering, and yearning that gives birth to a good manuscript. To quote Haruki Murakami's novel, Kafka on the Shore, it's like Tolstoy said, happiness is an allegory, unhappiness a story. The following are examples of writings that came from authors' pain and agony as part of their personal trauma and experience, which I would like to share with you. When the Chilean writer Isabel Allende's grandfather passed away, she was unable to be by his side. Back then, she was in Venezuela, politically exiled for 13 years from Chile, her home country. Because she could not be with him, Allende wrote letters to her grandfather that later became her most famous novel, The House of the Spirit. Later, her daughter Paula got sick and died. Isabel wrote about this devastating time of her life in a novel called Paula, which went on to become a bestseller and a hit. Hundreds of thousands of people who suffered the loss of loved ones found great relief in reading Paula. In Black Milk, the Turkish writer Elif Shafak wrote about her personal experience with fearing marriage, meeting her husband, and postpartum depression. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou is another example of a great work that emerged from female trauma. There's a huge difference between writing fiction and a biography. In the latter, there are mere facts. Biography is a life as seen by its writer's eye without tricks and special techniques, whereas imagination plays a more central role in writing fiction. Some writers have a hard time separating between their daily journals and fiction works, such as Anais Nin, who used to write for psychological therapy and confused her biography with the first novels. However, no writer can write a great fiction without living it. In June 2014, I was watching the news and got shocked by the footage of ISIS members destroying Iraqi artifacts. History going back to 10,000 years was being erased within seconds, erased forever. Lamasu, the human-headed bull, sometimes lion with two huge wings, a protective deity that dated back to the Assyrian era 10,000 years ago, got destroyed. Jonah's shrine, which has special religious and historical importance in Mosul city, where the population is an uncommon, near-equal mix of Muslims and Christians, was bombed. I got depressed. I couldn't eat or sleep well for weeks after. Finally, I decided to write a novel about the destruction inflicted by ISIS. I decided to write a novel about it because I realized that only events that are made into stories get immortalized, and that in one way or another, no matter what we write about, we always write ourselves. Every word I wrote lived in my heart and soul for some time before it was written. Somehow, those very words will live forever and are much harder to destroy.
Thank you all. For those who came in and maybe missed the introductions, let me reintroduce, at least by name, the four panelists before you. It's Gina Cole from New Zealand, Kateryna Babkina from Ukraine, Chandramohan Sathyanathan from India, and Eman Alyousuf from the UAE. We're going to move into the questions from the audience, and if I don't see a hand shoot up, I will start the conversation. Great. We have a microphone that's going to come around, and Lee, I see somebody, row 3 right there. So.
Hi, this question is for Gina. So, I know in some of the other presentation talks, like, there was talk about political correctness and how that can be a very, and I hadn't seen, this is also, I guess, for, sorry, I have to look at the names again. Just give me a second. Chandramohan, yeah, this is for you too, since you also brought it up. So how does one avoid I've never thought of political correctness as one being a censoring of one's own story for like particular like consumption, if that makes sense. So when it comes to those kinds of stories, how do you not censor yourself when you write and also have it be understandable for others and be a relatable experience that other people can sort of empathize with?
So your question is, as I understand it, how do we not censor ourselves and not be politically correct? Is that right?
Essentially. Sort of. It's like, it's how do we not be politically correct in the sense that we censor ourselves? So yes, sorry, I just totally reiterated that. But it's also how do we make it sort of not quite not accessible, but more, well, yes, accessible.
I actually don't know how to make my writing accessible to other people, because I don't really think a lot about the audience when I'm writing. I write for myself, and I trust that the audience will understand what I'm writing about. And I don't think I write from a place of political correctness because I don't actually know what that is. So I really write from a place where I want to write what I enjoy, I suppose, selfishly. So yeah, I'm not quite sure if that answers your question.
It does. I completely understand where you're going to get. Oh.
Chandra.
I completely understand. So thank you.
So I think it's part of the responsibility of a writer to not to speak exactly the way he feels. That is, that is I don't know the right word. Like he has something to say, then that is he filters that in such a way that he does not overtly indulge in damaging civil rights struggles of other groups. For example, most of the times, like a very emotionally charged response to something could end up doing more harm than good if I'm not responsible enough. So this is what I meant by being I wouldn't say politically correct. And also there is another thing that during the times when there are atrocities in a particular section of society, and there is a snowballing of discourse or protest against that, most of the time there are dominant positions within that group. So someone who tries to dissent within the group of dissenters, it's always very tricky. It's very tricky. So that's what I mean by being politically correct from a perspective of that is being articulated from within the protesting group. Yeah. So most of the time, what happens is most of the intellectually engaged or writers have their own, like there are 4 writers, and we all 4 respond to a particular moment in history. Then they have very, which are not congruent, opinions which are not really congruent. So it might blunt the, movement or some kind of legislation we are trying to push. So it is just that aspect that I was trying to highlight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This question is for Eman. My name is Eman Alyousuf, and I'm just curious, how do you draw the line, I guess, between extremist and normal for identity purposes? You brought the Assyrians' culture, 10,000-year-old civilization for the people in that part of the world, and then you are trying to identify, the people in that area where people are divided between being Muslims and being also trying to draw the line between extreme Islam and moderate Islam. How do you portray that?
Okay.
Well, thank you for your question. Such a great one. When I wrote the novel Guardian of the Sun, or The Sun's Guardian, Haris Shams, I was not thinking of actually illustrating that. I mean, I had the problem back in my background because I saw it on the news and I wanted to address that to immortalize the case or the issue. But what I did actually is what I also do in my short story groups or collections. And all my short story collections, neither or either of my characters have names. I address people with adjectives, like, for example, she's funny, he has a cat. I don't have names, religions, because at the end of the day, I believe that we share the same problems, obstacles, feelings, love for life, hate, everything. But the other things that you see, like, that differentiate us, and that shouldn't. In The Guardian of the Sun, the main character is Hussein Mansour, and he lives on the area that got bombed at the end of the novel, which is the mosque or the shrine of Jonas or Yunus in Arabic. And he had really just one simple dream of owning a piece of land. And this was a symbolism of the belief that connects the identity and citizenship. Like, he believes that if he is a citizen of his country, he should own a piece of land. And then grow sunflowers with their friendly faces or friendly appearances that will just brighten the country and resolve the problem. It's a romantic idea that may solve a problem in his perspective. The story has a lot into it. It has something that you would read and at the first glance, and then you will get from the main character. And it has these different angles or perspectives that come within. Again, to answer your question, so I did not talk about these things maybe in a very clear way. One more thing to address is that one of the 8 great wonders of the world is the hanging Babbling gardens, and it's not visible, it's not there, it's buried underground, and excavations in the 90s, beginning of the 90s, discovered that they are not actually in Babel, in Iraq, but they are beneath the mosque that was bombed. So imagine that gardens and treasures and gold and a lot of, I don't know, jewelry, like the 1,001 Arabian Nights are just beneath this amazing area of land. And people are living these really small dreams every day without knowing about this fact. So I hope I answered your questions.
Hello, you have to be.
Yeah, you'll speak directly into the top.
Speak directly into. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, hi. This question is maybe for anybody who feels like they'd like to answer it. If a writer is writing a character that comes from a culture outside of their own, plainly there's lots of research that needs to be done in so that you're not insensitive or incorrect, like so that you're not misrepresenting some things. When do you think it is time to stop researching and to begin writing? Because you will never be the character that you're writing if it is outside of your culture.
I would say you're gonna keep researching even when you're done with writing. Once you took this challenge of becoming the person out of another culture to write about him, you would keep researching this like kind of forever.
Awesome.
Yeah, you don't want to become paralyzed by research forever, but I think that a certain amount of research is necessary in order to get it right, because if you don't get it right, you will be called on it, so you don't want that to happen. But yeah, I think as long as you approach it with respect and understanding, so that you're not writing stereotypes, I think that's what's necessary. But yeah, you can go on forever researching. At some point you have to make a decision about, is this enough research? Do I know enough? And then just write. Yeah, there's no rule about that.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for this fascinating discussion. So I'm a diaspora immigrant into the United States. I grew up in India, and I completely understand your question about are you Hindu and are you Brahmin, which both I am, right? So it kind of works both ways. So my question is, essentially, do you find the negotiation of the self versus the non-self as the source of creative spirit that drives your writing? I mean, it is, I would assume that that negotiation is necessary, you know, to allow the spurt of writing to happen. I mean, if it were too comfortable in your own skin, why would you bother to write?
I think, as I said in my paper, I feel like I'm negotiating myself within the dominant culture every day anyway. So that's reflected in my writing. Because I come from a marginalised position. So even if I try not to, I can't help it. It comes through in my writing anyway, so I can't avoid it really. So I'm constantly negotiating it anyway. I don't know what other people think.
Well, if you're even not coming from marginalized position in nowadays world, you kind of cannot feel truly comfortable in your own skin since you have your eyes opened and you see what is going on around. So this is like never-ending source of writing, of thinking, of doing research, of changing the stuff in all the possible ways. Somebody is doing science, somebody is doing writing, somebody is doing journalism and stuff. But this is the main source, I guess.
Yeah, so I think every writer is constantly reinventing himself. Like, you know, every day is like, I don't know. So most of the time, like, I think there is a panel on how the social media affects writing, in the sense that, you know, like we put up something, or like there's almost immediate feedback. So constantly the writer is like, I don't know, critiquing himself, looking himself in the mirror. So I think what the observation you made is so apt. That's what I feel.
Well, I come from a mixed marriage. My mom is Iraqi, my dad is from the UAE, and I had a lot of trouble growing up. So although it may look like they're really Arab countries and close to each other, but there's a huge difference in between. And I think that when it comes to writing or thinking about when do you start, you know, where is the line between self and not self, I'm a total mess. And that's why we write. That's why we keep questioning. It's the uncertainty that makes us rethink and search and write. And I don't think we'll ever stop thinking. So.
Worried about what's lost if we judge fiction by nonfiction standards, as if a novel or a poem is just an illustration of an ethnographic study or some kind of sociological survey. And I'm not a writer, but it seems like to me, aren't there also standards of judging that are sort of internal to fiction? Like, how does this relate to the plot? Or am I doing justice to the character as they're developing? And how do you weigh those out versus whatever, I don't know, some critic or some academic or some politician might say? Thanks.
Can I answer? I'll start with. When I write people, and I was happy when the Guardian of the Sun's Guardian was published, and readers would tell me that this so-and-so character would remind me of my uncle that I really hate, or or my mother, or a part of me, or someone who I saw on the street, and I don't really think of any opinions or readers when I write, maybe just what Gina just said right now. I remember people, and I have like this mosaic of pictures and characteristics that goes into one character and creates familiar faces and suffering and pain and group of dreams. So yeah, at the end of the day, we'll find similar people that you can just are familiarized with, friends or yourself, reflected in my work. So,
Are there other questions? Very Very good. I have about 15 questions, but I'm gonna. I think I can ask those at another time. Let me give you a couple of announcements before we break. There are a series of. This is the beginning of a conversation that will last throughout the fall. We have dozens and dozens of public events. We would love you to be a part of those conversations. We'll have readings, panels, film screenings. Tonight at 5 o'clock at Shambo House at the north end of Clinton Street, Jacqueline Goldberg from Venezuela and Adriana Borja Enriquez will be reading. That's at 5 p.m. You can come and keep carbo loading. We'll have bagels there. On Sunday at 4 o'clock, we are going to have a reading at Prairie Lights. And let me make sure I get the names right. Yes, we have Bejan Matur from Turkey reading with Salabadis, who has just arrived from Algeria. We're so happy he's joined us. And Lee Marshall, an MFA student from the playwriting program. That's 4 o'clock at Prairie Lights. And then Adriana Borja Enriquez will be curating a screening of the film En el nombre de mi hija at 7 o'clock on Sunday evening in Adler 105, and that's part of the Cinematheque screening series. Finally, I just want to say all of our writers' writing samples and biographies are available on our website. We encourage you to go in there and really begin an exploration and come out and meet our writers every chance you get. One final hand, please, for all of our presenters today. Great conversation.